The Trump administration.
Jill Tokuda is live in studio along with UHERO economist Carl Bonham and Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday for another episode of Spotlight Now. We have three guests, so we want to jump right into it right away. But we always want to encourage those of you who are watching to engage in the conversation and enter your questions into the comment section of our Hawaii News Now Facebook page.
And we will be reading those. We want to start with our first guest from Washington today, here back in her district. Congresswoman Jill Tokuda is joining us. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I can't imagine what your schedule is like and what your life is like these days. Just broad strokes, and we'll get into the policy in a minute. What is it like to be in Congress right now?
It's chaotic, absolute chaos. And every morning you wake up in a different time zone for me, with more chaos, at your doorstep. And so it's been tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we want to hear from you. Today, the Pentagon announcing that they aim to cut up to 60,000 civilian workers. This is a significant portion of the workforce. We know that Hawaii is not protected against these job cuts. What are your thoughts about that kind of a broad-scale layoff?
This would definitely impact Hawaii. We don't know yet how many of those 60,000 will come from our shipyards and our bases right here. As you know, our civilian military workforce is quite a large population here. So we are talking about local family. It's been local jobs supporting our economy that will be cut. What we do know of the 60,000 jobs he's talking about is some have already taken the deferred resignation. They were basically bullied to resign in this particular situation. Some have been laid off because they were probationary. Now they're going for the third level of indiscriminate culling. As I said, we don't even know if these jobs are essential that these individuals are holding. We don't know where they lie across the country, right here in Hawaii, what they're actually doing. This potentially is going to really impact our national security posture, our ability to defend ourselves. If they shared at least the rhyme or reason on how they got to the 60,000 number, that would be great. But sadly, it's all about trying to reach that magic number to allow them to be able to afford $1 trillion tax cuts to the ultra rich. And that's just not acceptable.
I'm wondering, because as we look at across the board, it seems like every day there's news of another cut, another reduction in budget and spending. And there are some on the conservative side who say that this is what we need. We need smaller government, that it's gotten too big. What would you counter to that and advocate for why maybe that shouldn't be the case with this being the theme of this Trump administration?
Well, first of all, no one disagrees that we have to tackle fraud, waste, and abuse. And you've heard those three words quite a bit from this administration. We all want that. We want to spend tax dollars wisely. What you are seeing here, though, is no rhyme or reason behind the cuts, to the point that many times they're actually being forced by the courts or by their own realization that they have to rehire thousands of workers and thousands of individuals. I think for folks that think this is a really great thing, let's keep in mind we live in Hawaii. We are all very connected to each other. And as I've told folks, you are literally 1 degree of separation from the harm that will come from these inhumane, indiscriminate cuts. You might have your job and your benefits today, but very soon in the future, you will see the impacts. A family member, a loved one, a friend, your businesses, whether it's these trade wars that we don't need with our allies, literally impacting businesses' ability to survive right here, or cuts to Medicaid and Social Security and SNAP. We are so connected here in Hawaii that while you can say this seems like a good thing, very soon, if not already, you'll be feeling the hurt.
It's interesting when you tick off all those areas, it's hard for me to figure out where we should be paying the most attention. Where are you devoting, most of your energy right now? There are key industries. You just mentioned social services, Medicare, Medicaid, people worried about those Social Security checks. We just heard about defense, and of course that could leave us vulnerable in the ways that you mentioned to outside threats. The list goes on and on. Where are you most focusing your energies?
It definitely is hard to focus when every day there's so many cuts across the board throughout the region. I would say for me, it's about the social safety net. What they are doing is they're destroying that safety net people rely on when they need it most. Your health care, food on the table, a roof over your head. We have seen literally billions of dollars of cuts. coming in these three particular areas. And especially when people are now worried, will I have a job? Or they've been let go. If you don't have that social safety net there, grandma and grandpa, uncle and auntie, your friend, your neighbor, your cousin, they won't be able to put food on the table, and they will not be able to keep a roof over their head. And especially here in Hawaii, where it's already been tough enough, we will see more and more of our keiki and our families leaving this state because they simply cannot afford it. So that social net, health care, food on the table, a roof over your head seems so basic, but right now we have got to put our arms around it and protect it.
Earlier, when some of these cutbacks were happening and some of the people who live here in Hawaii were already feeling the effects, you put a call out to ask for stories, to hear from personal anecdotes of what people are going through. If you can share what the plan is to do with some of these stories, how are you using the local voice within some of the arguments that you're making on the Hill?
You know, it's actually heartbreaking when you read the stories. Folks that have lost their jobs, finally able to come home from the mainland. And now they don't know what they're going to be able to do with no income coming in. Children, kids, worried about whether or not they're going to have to leave because their mom or dad lost their job. Can they afford to pay for community college if their parents aren't working? They think they're going to have to leave now. Seniors, kupuna, have worked hard all their lives, worried about their Social Security. It really is heartbreaking. For me, it's about taking it to the floor when we go back to Congress, sharing these stories, sharing it in every opportunity, every town hall that I have, every Zoom talk story I have, to make it real. Because people have to understand that these inhumane cuts have human impact. And the impact that I'm feeling and seeing out there in the community, it hurts. And that needs to be shared.
And when you share these stories, is there anyone who is receptive to that? I mean, I think it must be very hard to be in the minority in this circumstance where you have a president who is hell-bent on getting his agenda through, and you have, you know, people in his party who are largely supporting him. Are you finding allies? Are you finding that this lands anywhere?
I think this is a long game. I think we need to continuously be reaching out to our friends on the other side of the aisle and letting them see the human impact. They're starting to see it in their own town halls back home. You see that all the time, that's being put on YouTube and TikTok of people, you know, complaining at their Republican town halls as well. I think we have to just be persistent. We have to be aggressive. We need to help them find the courage. When I talk a lot about Medicaid and cuts to rural health, as the co-leader of the Bipartisan Rural Health Caucus, that's where I see soft ground, where they realize that if we lose health care for the most vulnerable in our communities, in rural America, where we're already struggling, they know that that is not something they can continue to do. And so it's just about being persistent and aggressive.
And would you say overall, I mean, when you look at it from the outside perspective and a lot of what is being covered, there just seems to be so much, you know, divisiveness between party lines and, you know, both sides arguing for the cases what the administration is making. Beyond what you mentioned, how do you find it working with you know, the majority and some of your Republican colleagues? Is there other common ground? Are you guys, is it Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other when you're walking past each other in the hallways? I mean, what is just the overall morale and the camaraderie like within the, you know, within Capitol right now?
Needless to say, this administration is making it very difficult to be bipartisan. You've seen from every statement that they have made, from Inauguration Day to the State of the Union, this is a president and administration that does not want to be bipartisan. In fact, wants to be very partisan. It makes it difficult for us in Congress. I will say in the, you know, the hours after and the days or so after the State of the Union, it was difficult to really see Democrats and Republicans commingling, coming together. We have to be intentional. And so for myself, I intentionally go to the other side, work with them on things like the Bipartisan Rural Health Caucus. We are launching a bipartisan coffee caucus as well to focus on the industry. And we are the only growers in the country domestically, as you know. So how do we support our industry? We have to make those intentional efforts to show that aloha, even though, quite frankly, that aloha is not coming back to us from this administration. You
mentioned rural health, and I want to dig into that a little deeper. You know, my understanding is that 1 in 3 Hawaii residents rely on Medicaid or Medicare. We could see deep cuts to this program. What are your concerns, and do you think that the state can make up the difference there, or what will happen to these individuals who are reliant on this service?
Absolutely. When we take a look at Medicaid and Medicare and CHIP, when we're covering children, on every single island, we have vast majorities of our people that are being covered in some way, shape, or form. Every one of our families being covered, either through Medicare, allowing grandma and grandpa to stay in a care home and having that particular coverage, Medicaid just to get basic health care coverage, and for our children, In some cases, close to 40% of our keiki here in Hawaii being covered by chips. All of these right now on the chopping block. When you cut $880 billion from a committee that oversees Medicaid and these Medicare funds, it will hit home hard. It will hit our most vulnerable, keiki to kapuna. It's going to cost a lot too. So needless to say, we're really going to have to prioritize. And as I've talked to some lawmakers, it's going to be uncomfortable, but you may not be able to make everyone whole, which would be a very difficult situation for everyone at every level of government.
We spoke to the governor just last week, and he had talked about some of the efforts that are being made on a state level to be able to combat with what's happening in D.C., the changing landscape, as well as what federal dollars come to the state. He seems to think that the state is in a good position with enough funds to support some of the initiatives that may be cut down for the next 2 years or so. Do you think that the state can afford this? And do you think that there is enough in the reserves where if things get cut, that the state of Hawaii and the residents will see minimal impact, as the governor said, over the next 2 years?
But first of all, let me just say it's great that we have been putting things away in the rainy day fund. From the time now Lieutenant Governor Luke and I were sitting as heads of the money chairs, we were making sure we had something in the rainy day fund. I will say this, as a former Ways and Means chair now at the federal level, I grossly underestimated just how much we truly depend on federal dollars. We know it's close to 20% of the entire state budget is federally funded. But when we really take a look at the infrastructure that goes into making sure that dollars get to the ground level, to the communities, to individuals, that is a high cost. And if we're forced to bear that brunt as a state, the dollars will go very, very quickly. And so I would just say prudence right now. We cannot continue to save enough. At the end of the day, it's going to be prioritization, but it will be extremely difficult given our dependence on federal dollars here in Hawaii.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about education if we could. The Trump administration has made clear that one of their priorities is dismantling the entire Department of Education. Hawaii is in a unique circumstance because the entire state is one district, and so what do you worry about the consequences if that were to happen? And that to me feels like part of the struggle with all of this. It's a lot of what ifs, it's a lot of hypotheticals, but this one seems like it could actually happen.
This they've had on their radar for a long time now. I have literally stood in front of the Department of Education and said, hell no to dismantling it. I'm a proud public school graduate. My sons go to public school. That's more than the folks running the federal Department of Education can say now. They don't get it, what a great equalizer public education actually is, what a resource it is, what goes into actually educating the entire child, for making sure that they are fed so that they can learn, to make sure they have access to resources that give them truly a free and appropriate education. And so if we were just to get a check, here states, you go ahead and handle this because we've destroyed the entire department. Think of the human capacity and resources that currently exist at the federal level now to help get those dollars to the schools, to the child, to the family. For us to have to replicate that would cost much, much more, I assure you, than the check that the federal government would give us. And already, most principals and teachers and parts of the Department of Education will tell you the federal government's dollars that we get have never been enough. Many of the requirements that we do to make sure our children are educated, have that chance, were an unfunded mandate from the federal government. So imagine trying to do even more with less. That's going to shortchange our keiki's future. And as a mother of public school students, we can't have this happen.
Has there been any conversation with DOE officials to your office, what they're concerned about, what you're hearing from them when there's talk of this on the national level, and what are those conversations like?
To your point, right now the department is literally just scrambling to try to figure out what are the scenarios, what's the plan B, C, and D if any of these actions happen. I have actually been able to also talk with teachers, and I will tell you it's heartbreaking to hear the kind of fear that some of their keiki are living with, from the ICE raids in Kona, which should never, ever have happened. To taking a look at how children are dealing with even the two genders executive order, to looking at how students are worrying about their parents losing their job. I got a letter from a middle schooler in Hilo who told me, my mom works for the federal government. Her coworkers have been fired. What happens if she loses her job? How can you help? And so I just send out a big mahalo to right now our educators who in many ways are on the front lines, making sure our keiki are both safe, but also making sure that they are able to handle what has been an absolute traumatic experience since the start of this administration.
I want to get to a viewer comment here and get your thoughts, because you talked about what lawmakers can do. And this person is asking, Keikoa Kealoha says, we in public health are very worried about the instability caused by these cuts. Arbitrary cuts to federal programs are dangerous. They lead to the spread of infectious diseases and chronic illnesses. Poor communities bear the burden of this. Mahalo for your continued advocacy. How can our communities mobilize to better advocate? So we talked about what lawmakers can do. As individuals facing this, what's your response to Keikoa?
You know, first of all, own your voice, get out there, share what you feel, yell what you feel. I think the fact that you've seen so many protests and rallies in these last few months, even right here in Hawaii, do it civilly, do it with aloha. But people have to know that there's impact and consequences. When we create any kind of hesitation on vaccinations, people get sick. Children die. This is not something we can find acceptable. Use your voice to remind people of the human consequences of bad decisions and funding freezes and cuts. Make sure your friends, your neighbors, your families know across the country what is happening and what could happen. Own your voice, be that voice. We cannot do this alone. And I will tell you, the power I've found is when community stands up and yells with us what cannot happen and what must be done.
I want to ask you, because you represent this district specifically, about how what's happening in DC could impact the rebuilding efforts in Lahaina and what's going on in Maui. What are those, plans like? What have you heard, and what maybe concerns you as Lahaina begins to and continues to rebuild?
So one of the first things I did when I heard that they were trying to actually reduce the office that administers the CDBG DR funds by 84%. If you can imagine, there was close to 900 staff and they wanted to cull it down to far less than 200. I led a letter with about 48 other members of Congress, including Republicans, to say we cannot allow this to happen. The disaster has hit our communities. Don't be the disaster after disaster in making it almost impossible for them to be able to draw down those funds, because you have no one to answer the phone, no one to process the request, no one to cut the check back to the counties who absolutely need this. And we know they're still literally processing receipts from Puna lava flow, from Kauai floods. It takes time, even with full staff. If you were to decimate the office, you would reduce our ability to get monies out the door quickly. And Lahaina right now needs it to recover. If you look at their plan, most of it's for housing. If we don't build that housing fast, people will leave.
And building that housing obviously takes materials. We're looking at steel tariffs, among other tariffs. What are your concerns about the impact on that?
We have so many struggles. These are struggles we did not need, right? Don't start a trade war with our allies of all things. And think about Maui. They have a lot of Canadian visitors. And from what I heard, that hasn't quite trickled slowly, that hasn't stopped just yet. But people are going to start to make decisions with their pocketbooks if they don't know if they have a job across the country and even here in Hawaii. We're going to hurt our economy, our ability to bring revenues in to help with the rebuild. If you have a trade war, supply chain issues will definitely come into place. If you take away all the staff from the office over there in HUD, no one will be there to pick up the phone and answer questions and process the checks that we need. We need every single bit of help that we can get. We've got to push back against all these really ridiculous decisions and orders coming down.
I want to just continue to ask about Maui, though. When you are on the floor and you're advocating for Maui and you're talking about, just the rebuilding process. I mean, do you get a sense from your Republican colleagues that there still is concern over what has happened there about the rebuilding process? I'm just trying to gauge, now that there's been some time separation. Absolutely. And we saw what happened in California, have people forgotten about Maui, and how much of that continues to be a priority for members of Congress?
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons I committed to being on the floor as much as possible with my Maui Minute, making sure people knew in the speeches I was giving in front of my colleagues that this was a priority. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I often get asked on both sides of the aisle, how's Maui doing? How's the recovery? How's the rebuilding? Every person and member who comes here that I can get to Maui, walk them through Lahaina, show them the process of rebuilding, show them how much more we need to do. This takes constant advocacy. And yes, we've had disaster on disaster since, tornadoes literally hitting over the weekend, snowstorms. But I'm going to take back to the floor and make sure they remember Maui still needs help.
How are you sustaining yourself through all this? Because it just seems
Lots of
like
coffee.
Yeah. Well, I know that as a journalist, I can only consume so much news, but I don't need to take action on it, right? Your mandate is to then take that information and act on it. So how are you sustaining yourself?
I will tell you it's difficult because you literally want to save everyone, right? You want to try to save everything that's been cut. Every issue is important to someone, whether they're talking about the arts, whether they're talking about, canine dogs literally being deprived of vet visits and food. That was a cut just recently, keep in mind. Whether it was nuclear scientists, whether it is basic health care, Medicaid, our rural health centers potentially closing. You do want to save everyone. It is difficult. I have a big shout out and kudos to my team in DC and Hawaii who literally helped me be covering as many things as possible, supporting our constituents. But it can be a challenge. And so as I often tell students who ask, how do you do it? You have to give yourself a little space every once in a while and realize you're not perfect. You can't fix everything. But looking at all the challenges that we have, the hurt that's coming our way, we have to do everything we can to help as many people in as many areas as we possibly can cover. So it's a challenge. Coffee helps. And I'm so blessed to be able to come home to Hawaii.
Okay, well, Jill Takuda, thank you so much for being here today. It was wonderful to catch up with you, and I'm sure we'll see you again the next time you're in district. Thanks for being here. Carl Bonham joins us on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight. Now we continue on in our conversation about how the cuts from the Trump administration are impacting us here at home.
And we are going to the person with all the data, and that is Carl Bonham. He is the executive director of the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And so we just heard a lot from the Congresswoman about all of the different areas that she's seeing being impacted right now. But a lot of it is hypothetical. What if, what
Right.
if, what if? Let's talk about what are we seeing? Are we seeing any impacts yet? And if not, when can we actually expect to feel them?
Yeah, so right now, and this is true across the whole country, there aren't actually any hard data that says here's where you're seeing the cut. So as an example, if you look at the actual federal spending for January, it's up from last year, right? So what we're hearing about are some of it's just pure chaos, right? You're fired this day, you're rehired this day, and some of it is planned cutting, right? And in terms of actual data that says here's the impact, it's not there yet. But it will show up, and it will show up really starting in about 3 weeks. So in first part of April, we're going to get the employment report, the national employment report for the month of March. And that'll be the first jobs report that will start to really reflect any of the federal layoffs and the private sector cutbacks. Other than that, the only sort of hard data is stock market data, right? A lot of it is perceptions. It's consumer confidence. We've seen the consumer confidence numbers really plummet. We've seen the economic policy uncertainty data go through the roof. We've seen business uncertainty reach almost all-time record highs. I mean, higher than during the pandemic, right? The National Federation of Independent Businesses surveys a whole bunch of small businesses across the whole country. Their measure of uncertainty has had, in the last year, it's seen 2 of the highest readings since 1976. And that is affecting the economy. We just don't have the hard data that says how much is it affecting it yet.
I wonder how you are navigating this time as someone who, as an economist and someone whose job or responsibility is to kind of have some projections and forecasts into the future. We see the tariffs that are proposed and then gets called off the next day. There just seems to be so much uncertainty. How are you navigating that through your role to be able to provide a forecast for lawmakers and other individuals who rely on this type of data to help make some of these financial decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're not alone in this. This is what businesses have to do. This is what government has to do, and really, it's a matter of make a set of assumptions about what the playing field is going to look like. And we've been doing this since the election. So when we released our fourth quarter forecast report right after the election, we said, look, we don't know what the policies are going to be exactly. We only know what the promises have been. And we made a set of assumptions. So for example, on tariffs, we assumed kind of a modest set of tariffs that would raise the effective tariff rate for the country as a whole by about 5 percentage points. So roughly from about 2% to about 7%. Well, where we are right now is already beyond that, right? It's 7 or 8 percentage point increase in the effective tariff rate right now. If we get the tariffs that are announced for April 2nd, right, the reciprocal tariffs, then we'll see something like a 10 to 13 percentage point increase. So what you do is you make a set of assumptions, you run it through your models, it generates a forecast, and you let everybody know that here's our assumptions, and we're going to keep updating. Right, so you really need to kind of do scenarios and plan for different outcomes.
And when we're looking at the job cuts, Pete Hegseth saying today that we're looking at up to 60,000 DoD workers being cut. That's across the country, but obviously the military is a big part of our community. Defense is a big part of Hawaii's economy. What kind of an impact do you expect there? And I know we don't know who those people are yet.
Well, and so that's another example of Ryan's question. So in our last forecast report, when we were looking at federal job cuts, we explicitly excluded DoD from our analysis, right? So we estimated that there were about 2,200 jobs, federal civilian jobs, that could be lost in the state. Now, many of those have gone away and come back again, right? But when you add the DoD in, they're the bulk of the federal, right? We have about 35,000 federal civilian workers in the state, and the bulk of those are in DoD. And so that's disturbing. Now, what I'm hearing so far from, I don't know how accurate it is, what I'm hearing so far is that PACOM is not on the chopping block. And so that's comforting.
And when we talk about jobs and these jobs, the 35,000 that you're talking about, what kind of jobs are we talking about? Are these high-paying jobs? Are these low-level jobs? Are these salaries that are good in Hawaii, and can
They're
they
good.
be easily replaced?
Yeah, I mean, on average, they're good, right? They're just like any industry or any area. There's a whole wide range of jobs, but the average, if you look at average labor earnings for federal civilian workers in the state, it's about 40% higher than the average civilian worker.
Right. So my
So
point
it's like
being
$140,000. These are good paying jobs.
and those jobs cannot necessarily be replaced that easily
No,
then,
that's
because we
right.
don't have a lot of $140,000 jobs around.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're working, for the FBI, or you're working for, someone who's protecting our harbors or protecting us from invasive species, there's not necessarily a job to go into readily that doesn't involve some kind of a pay cut.
The other talk that's a word that we're hearing around through all this conversation is the word recession. And we've heard it from the administration, from the president himself. There are other analysts who are looking at the stock market and pointing signs towards that. Do you believe that we are heading towards a national recession? And if so, at times Hawaii tends to be a little behind what happens nationally. Where do you think we stand as a state should we head down this path?
So, I mean, we could be in a recession right now and not even know it, right? Because the hard data comes in with a lag. I don't think that's the case yet. The probabilities of a recession are growing, and that's really what people are talking about. So if you were to have gone back to, say, pre-election, I would have said that the probability of a recession in the U.S. was maybe between 15 and 20%. That's about average. We always have some probability of recession. Now, I would say we're probably closer to 35 to 40%. So that probability is rising, and it will continue to rise as this uncertainty grows. If the U.S. economy goes into a recession, even a modest recession, Hawaii is going to be significantly impacted and may very well follow. And primarily because we really have all of our eggs in one basket right now, right? 3/4 of the visitor spending is U.S. visitor spending. So if the stock market takes another 5 or 10% hit in April when some of this bad data starts coming out, to me that would significantly raise the probability of a recession, and we'll be adjusting our forecast accordingly.
And what about Hawaii's ability to weather this storm? The question that Ryan had asked the Congresswoman just about, the governor saying on this program just last week, we have reserves of money, we can weather this storm for about 2 years. Do you think that that's true?
I think it's pretty close to true. I mean, again, you have to know how bad the storm is, right? I mean, we had a little rain yesterday and we weathered it just fine. But if it had been a torrential downpour for a month, no, it would have been a mess. And if we do have significant, I don't know the exact number. I'm sure the governor probably told you how big the rainy day fund was. And, the carryover, the last I looked, was close to $1 billion in carryover funds. So yes, we can weather the storm for a period of time. I don't know if it's 2 years.
When you hear the argument from the president and those who are in support of what is happening in D.C. and all of these cuts, they say that things are going to be bad for a little bit in the beginning, but the whole idea behind this is to really invest back into the country, about really trying to provide more dollars to stay at home. As an economist, do you see that working? Do you think that this is something that could potentially happen where we do have this lull, but that it will then spark a economic boom?
Short answer is no. The long answer is the timing is all wrong. If one of the goals is to essentially rebuild the manufacturing base and to reindustrialize the U.S. economy, that's something that takes 4 or 5 years, right? You don't build a new factory to produce something in the United States that used to be built in Mexico in a week, right? That's years down the road, and businesses make those choices based on the playing field. Well, the playing field is changing daily. So that means the uncertainty about those choices is growing. And any tariff that goes into effect now could be gone in a year or 2 years. So it's not a basis for business decisions. The deregulation has the possibility of boosting economic growth, but again, that's a longer term prospect. So the cuts that we're talking about right now, the tariff impacts, those will slow the economy in the short run, and these other benefits or potential benefits are much longer down the road.
And to that end, Alan Liu has a comment saying, when fixing what is broken, there will be pain, adjustment will be made, and wasteful spending will be reduced. That's one opinion that kind of speaks to what Ryan was talking about. Knowing that there will be pain, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, what should lawmakers be doing right now to stave off some of that pain?
Well, it's what they're already doing, right? So they're planning for how we can support, for example, nonprofits who, the senator talked about the concern for the most vulnerable, right? And so the state is looking at how we can support those families and those children. And the other thing is to keep, to make sure that within state government we're being efficient and we're spending our dollars well, but also continue to do the work that we've been doing for the last several years, focusing on housing, focusing on homelessness, focusing on continuing to focus on the long drawn-out process of diversifying Hawaii's economy. So it doesn't fundamentally change, your goals. You just have to deal with the crises along with it.
One of the things that I know that you always analyze as well and pay a lot of close attention to is what's happening with the state of our tourism, because that directly impacts us as the largest industry and economic driver. Have you noticed anything, or what do you think will happen with all of these changes and how that will impact the tourism industry and thus trickle down to the overall Hawaii economy?
So this is, again, one of those areas where, unfortunately, hard data is actually not available at all right now. The passenger count data is not available right now, and that was something we used very, very heavily. So the last time we got a data point for passenger counts was into February. Normally we would have some idea of how many people were getting off the planes for March, and we use that as a, in a nutshell, our forecast is for a decline in visitors and visitor spending, a decline in visitors starting in the second half of this year. We started off the year reasonably strong. And really, if you look, where we think real visitor spending will be, say, 2 years down the road, it's several $1 billion lower than it was in 2023. And so that's not, we're not talking about it falling apart, but it's not going to be a source of economic growth. There'll be some stability there, assuming the U.S. economy doesn't go into a deep recession. And right now, our forecast doesn't have a U.S. recession. So we're looking at declining visitor spending, construction holding things up, and we don't yet have a U.S. recession in the forecast.
And is that the decline because of, let's say, Canadians not coming, or is that because people are uncertain and they don't plan a vacation because they don't know how much money they're going to have?
So the primary drivers in our forecast is decline in U.S. visitors that we are expecting in the second half of this year and the beginning of next year. That's coming about because everyone in the country will face higher costs because of the tariffs. The labor market is weakening. They're facing more uncertainty about jobs and income, and no growth in international visitors. Combination of some growth in Japanese visitors and then probably some loss of Canadian visitors.
It sounds grim. I gotta say.
Well, we've been through much, much worse. Right, we're still looking at, remember, the U.S. economy was in a really good place at the end of last year. We don't have all kinds of problems in that economy that are going to sort of drag us down and hold us down for a long period of time. So even if we go into recession, it doesn't mean we're going to have a long, prolonged one.
Okay, I'm holding you to that. Carl Bonham with UHERO. The Lieutenant Governor will be with us just after this break. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live.
We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV.
That doesn't look too good.
And send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
Source Alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now. We'd like to welcome in our next guest. But before we do, we once again want to encourage all of you to be a part of the conversation and enter your question and comments in the comment section on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm reading all of them, and thank you for those of you who are contributing to that conversation. We want to welcome in Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke, who is joining us now. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for being here. We heard from the Congresswoman about what's happening at the federal level. We heard from Carl Bonham, ending on a bit of a bright note, but some realities there that are facing us. You know, when you're looking at this, especially given your experience as a lawmaker for so many years, how are you feeling about how we are doing economically right now?
You know, I think part of the problem is the uncertainty, and I think that is what is impacting a lot of the decisions and a lot of the things that is happening with the economy. When you look at the stock market, when you look at the projections, the reason why it's all going south is because there's very little predictability. There's little things that you can depend on. We're not sure. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, which is leading to this chaos and confusion and a lot of unrest right now.
I want to ask, if you put yourself back into your old shoes and say you're back as finance chair, as you served for so many years, what would be some of the things that you would be advocating for leading the state budget and trying to do, knowing of all the uncertainties that you speak of from the federal government?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we did is meet with the legislators right away. As soon as the federal fund freezes happened, we met with both the House and the Senate and talked them through with about the different scenarios. You know, for myself and some of the legislators, we've been through the Trump administration the first go around, and during that time we learned from some of the things that they have tried to do, and what we have learned was even what's going on now, they initially do these overreach, right? So even with the federal freeze, even with some of the firings, and then they roll it back. So even with the federal freeze, they realize, okay, maybe we can't do it, and then they've been rolling it back. And then I think that's in conjunction with the great work of our congressional delegation and working across the aisle with some of the Republican legislators to talk to the White House about some of the devastating impact about some of the overreaching decisions. And so what we're seeing is this push and pull where the White House would make a decision, and then they realize whether it's through the courts or through other type of reasoning or analysis, they pull it back. So we're having a lot of, you know, every day there's something new. But going back to what happened the first time President Trump was in office, the state of Hawaii, we had reduction at that point in time, initially about $300 million loss in some type of Department of Human Services funding and Medicaid. The thing it's hard to gauge is COVID happened right after. So that was 2019 and COVID happened. And so because of that, there was significant amount of federal infusion. And so that blunted some of the negative impacts of basically the last time President Trump was in office. The other thing that we knew right away, which was going to get cut, was what was known as Title X. That's for family planning. And that was about $1.7 million, only because of, you know, it's different policy and different values. And because of that, you know, the legislature, when I was in office, we supplanted federal funds with state funds, and that continued to be in existence today.
The difference there, of course, is that you're talking about, less than $2 million for one specific area. And here we're looking at what could be, much more than that. The governor was on here saying, and we've referenced this conversation twice now, and here we are again, saying that he does think that the state has enough in the rainy day fund and those carryover funds to kind of weather this storm for 2 years. Do you agree with that assessment? And given that there are finite resources, what areas do you think that the state should be spending in?
Currently, we have about $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund. That's by far the most we have ever had in the rainy day fund. So thanks to the legislature for their foresight, and thanks to them being cautious and hopefully, trying to figure out how we can work together to help our people weather kind of the chaotic times. The unfortunate reality is every day it's a little bit different, right? Every day you're hearing different kind of news, different kind of announcements about what's impacted. Oh, okay, all these people are laid off, and then they go back and say, okay, you're not laid off. The biggest impact this is going to have is not so much, it might impact the state agencies, but I'm more afraid of the impact on a lot of the nonprofits and non-government agencies. Because even if they pull back, initially if they were to do a freeze and they say, okay, we're going to audit you and then we're not going to pay this until we go through an audit, some of these agencies and nonprofits, they cannot have a situation where they're not paid for about a month while they're going through a review. In that meantime, they may have to lay off individuals. So it's those entities who are not directly with state government or county government, but they provide significant services to our people. Those are the ones that we care about. We are very aware of, and we're working directly with them.
You are going to be taking a trip to Washington, D.C. What is going to be your main focus as we talk about all these cuts and potential freezes and all this impact? What is something that you're going up there, the hopes of trying to resolve, or some of the goals that you have with this trip in mind?
One of the things that we have asked our legislators and folks in the community to report is whenever they hear about any federal fund freeze or whenever they cannot draw down, they need to contact us, or they need to contact with a legislator right away, just so that we can keep track of some of the things that's going on in the community. One group was the Cattlemen's Council. The Cattlemen's Council that represents many of the ranchers around the state. They said they cannot draw down what's known as an environmental quality program. And the reason for that is, on its face, when you're in the federal office, they might think, oh, environmental control, is this one of those green-related jobs, or is it related to climate change? Well, in this situation, it's for ranchers to deal with environmental issues, including invasive species, and they haven't been able to draw down anything. So what we are trying to do is go to the USDA, talk to them, showcase some of the things that we do in the state of Hawaii, some of the things that are grown here, including coffee and cacao, coffee and chocolate, that no other state grow. And if they want to say, hey, you know what, we want to protect American-made products, we want to protect things that are made here, then we want to showcase how special and unique Hawaii is, and at the same time educate them that, hey, some of the programs that you're cutting or freezing are not what you think.
I want to ask you about something that I know we've had you on to talk about a lot, and that is the Ready Keiki program. We did speak with the Congresswoman about dismantling the Department of Education and her concerns about what that could mean for public schools here in Hawaii. Tell us first how the program's going, how many more classrooms are we expecting this August, and what you're worried about from the federal level about potential impacts.
Right. When the initial federal freeze occurred, we heard that Head Start was impacted. Head Start is, preschool programs for certain low-income, ASSA-limited families, and we were very concerned. The Ready Keiki initiative, thanks to the legislature and thanks to the state, is completely state-funded, and some of the things that we want to do is continue to press in making sure that we have preschool opportunities for our 3 and 4-year-olds. In the last 2 years, we opened 55 classrooms around the state. And the next 2 years, we're planning to open another 50. And, we had really great feedback from principals, and we had great feedback from parents who are enrolling their kids in these programs. In addition to that, there's also what's known as preschool open doors, which is completely state funded. And because these are state funded, we need to concentrate on things that are state funded that will continue to help our working families be able to survive and live in the state of Hawaii.
Beyond all this that we discussed here with what's happening at the federal level, of course, we are also in the middle of the legislative session with a number of bills that continue to move through. Is there anything specifically that you're tracking that you are maybe trying to shepherd, or that you're speaking to lawmakers of, that is a priority of this administration, and anything else that you think is worthy of note during this legislative session?
This preschool open doors funding, which is subsidy for asset limited families, for them to send their kids to a private preschool. There's a bill that's going through the legislature which increases the eligibility just to include 2-year-olds as well. So other than just 3 and 4-year-olds, it will also allow your 2-year-old to be able to use this program, and that's going to be really well received in the community, because a lot of times, as your kids reach preschool age eligibility, a lot of times, they may not be toilet trained yet, but some of the kids excel really early, and you don't want age limitation to be in the way of them being able to go to preschool.
I'm interested also just in, as you're trying to navigate all of this, what your relationship is like with the governor right now. Where are you spending most of your time? Are you, how closely are you working with lawmakers? Your job is really, has always been sort of broadcast as the liaison between the 5th floor and downstairs. So how is that day to day?
The governor and I meet all the time, and in fact, we had dinner last night with Senator Schatz, and we were debriefing some of the issues that's going on both here and in DC, and it's for the state of Hawaii, it's really terrific that the governor and lieutenant governor work in tandem to address many of the issues. And he continues to focus on housing and homeless population, and he is doing a really great job and addressing many of the issues. He has asked me to head up Ready Keiki and broadband initiatives. And because we have so many issues, it takes all of us working all the time to address many of these things. And even with the Maui recovery, both of us are on the ground, going to Maui and flying there to see what some of the needs are. And the fact that, I have a partner in Josh who welcomes somebody like me to work really hard and welcome that relationship. Yeah, I think, the entire state benefit from that relationship.
You mentioned broadband, and that has been one of your initiatives throughout your time here as lieutenant governor. I'm wondering, there may be federal dollars connected to that as well. How concerned are you about any cuts that could potentially impact any of the progress and plans that you have made for this area?
The most important thing that we need to do, whether it's state agency or myself or even government or non-government organization, is to be in touch with the federal agencies that is dispersing some of the funds. So one of the things that our office did was reach out to NTIA right away to make sure that some of those funds that we're working and depending on are not jeopardized, and we continue to do that. Communication is the key, and we got to make sure that the funds that have been allocated will continue to be there for us.
Just as we wrap up, I wonder what you say to people in Hawaii who are feeling all of this uncertainty. That's basically the theme of our program today, whether it's from the federal level to what Carl Bonham shared and what you shared. How are you advising people to navigate this time and sort of temper their stress?
Yeah, no, it is a really stressful time. It's chaotic time, and then we completely sympathize and we empathize because we wake up and we feel that every day. The governor is trying his best. He continues to communicate with the White House. He communicates with the CODEL, and I do my work in communicating with the legislature and communicating with many of the community organization and our impacted individuals. In fact, one of the sponsors of this show, which is Hano, we are constantly talking with them about some of the impacts that they're feeling, and that's what we need to do. You know, in time of uncertainty, we need to depend on each other, and we need to make sure that we share information, be as honest and transparent as we can, so that we can try to figure out, okay, how do we fill that void? How do we fill that need?
I want to ask you before we end, as you know, you've taken on this role, what has been the biggest adjustment that you've personally had to make in your day-to-day life, or what has been something that surprised you about this job that maybe you didn't realize when you first sought after it?
You know, one of the things that people always ask me, you know, I mean, what is the best part about this job? And the best part about this job is, you know, I'm using my experience from the legislature, and I continue to have that relationship with many of the legislators, and then using that knowledge to try to fix ongoing issues. So even preschool is something that every administration said they would like to do, and we have not been able to do it for decades. And because of that, you know, I look at this job as an opportunity for us to fix lingering issues. So even with the preschool, and the other thing that the governor and I just recently announced was digitizing the egg form. Egg form is somebody who comes, whether you're a visitor or you're a returning kama'aina, you know that you gotta fill out those paper forms. And we are in a pilot program from March 1st to May 31st, where select flights will allow travelers to fill it out in a digital format.
Yeah, that's exciting, and even more, I mean, I have to say, another 50 classrooms is just fantastic. So we're excited to hear about that, and I know we'll have you on before the start of the school year. Thank you so much for being with us today, Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
From the moment you wake up,
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live.
We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And a great conversation here today on Spotlight, and now really diving into how some of the federal cuts and freezes could impact Hawaii. We started off this conversation, of course, with Congresswoman Jill Tokuda, who was very passionate about everything that is happening, and you could really hear the energy and emotion as she continues to travel the state and hears the concerns of people, recognizing that this could be a challenging time for many.
Yeah, I mean, just announced today, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, saying that up to 60,000 jobs from the Department of Defense will likely be cut in the coming months. Hawaii, of course, has a lot of folks who work in the federal government. Carl Bonham said 35,000 federal civilian workers. How many of those could be cut? How many of those work for the Department of Defense or other agencies? And the fact that Carl Bonham brought up that those jobs are not easily replaced. The fact, you know, $140,000 salary on average, very specific skill sets, not necessarily easy to replace, what impact that could have. And also him saying that we could already be in a recession.
Yeah, without even knowing it, but also pointing out that the state of the economy last year was so strong that he doesn't see it when and if we head into a recession, it being that significant or that big. And so he ended on a somewhat lighter note, which is always nice to have. And of course, also chiming in was our Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke, who updated us on everything happening at the legislature.
Yeah, and another 50 classrooms for preschoolers. We are excited to hear about that. Next week, we will have EMS Chief Dr. Jim Ireland along with Connie Mitchell from IHS. We hope to see you then.
Aloha.